Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Integrating Investor. I am Seth Levine of the Integrating Investor. You guys all know that by now. Thank you so much for joining us again. It feels great to be back. It has been a while since we've done a live show. Part of that is we had a fabulous guest, Corey Hoffstein. I hope you guys enjoyed that. He definitely has a very different approach to investing that I thought would be useful, maybe, or interesting to everyone out there. And you could kind of contrast that with how other investors have come on the show. Corey really focuses on portfolio construction and risk management. And it's just different. And he approaches investing very differently. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting too was he mentioned his use of the word play. And that, if you recall, Hugh Hendry brought up as well as a tool to use to sort of explore different investment ideas. And I thought that was very interesting. But I'm very happy to be back today. I'm very excited. We have some pretty great shows lined up. Jim Brown is going to be come on the show as a guest co-host for a few episodes here. He's going to do a whole series on money and banking. He's going to lay out his own view on this, and I think should be really interesting. One, because Jim is a really smart and thoughtful guy, but also I just finished up my own series on that as well. So you can really compare and contrast the different ideas that Jim and I have on money and banking and come to, our own conclusions. And maybe we'll come to discover some new truths, right? Because that's how we learn things. Going back to Rand's epistemology is through this comparison and the comparison and comparing, contrasting different ideas to really find out, what reality is and what it's not. As always, please like the show. You could just hit the button right now. I mean, Jim's coming on. Like, how bad could it be, right? And if I just interrupt Jim too much or get in his way, and you're like, oh man, enough of that. You could just unlike it or hit the thumbs down button later, right? This way you don't have to remember. You could follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Also sign up to get my monthly emails. And you'll get the next article coming out right into your inbox, which should be in a couple of weeks. And as always, we got that super chat function there. Please feel free to use that because I'm sure you may have some interesting questions for Jim. And as always, please email me show topic ideas or guest suggestions that you might have to info@integratinginvestor.com. That's info@integratinginvestor.com. All right, so moving right along, this is everyone's favorite part of the show, the disclaimer slide, especially now with Jim on, right? These are just personal opinions that he and I are expressing. It's not investment advice. It's not recommendations to buy or sell any securities or product or anything like that. Do your own work. It's for informational purposes only. You guys know the drill by now. So like I said, we are going to be joined today by Jim Brown. Many of you know Jim as the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute between 2017 and 2018. He's also was the CEO of the Prometheus Foundation from 2018 to 2019. Jim graduated, got his undergrad from the U.S. Air Force Academy and has his MBA from Harvard Business School. He's got a really fantastic investing career. He's a seasoned investor. Began in 1994 as a senior vice president and head of bank trust investments for First Interstate Bank of Texas. He's had a bunch of senior roles with Brandis Investment Partners. And before investing, of course, Jim was a U.S. Air Force pilot. He was also an airline pilot and a stockbroker. Today, Jim manages his family investment office with his wife, Kathy. And he sits on several boards, including the Ayn Rand Institute, the Brandis Institute, if I'm saying that correctly, and Monetary Metals and Company. Jim writes a Substack newsletter on money and banking called Hard Money Jim, where his theme is money, where it comes from, where it goes, how to use it, and importantly, how to keep it. Jim's a great mind and a great friend, and probably more than anyone else, I'll say he pulls off the cowboy really well. So well, I absolutely love this picture. So, without further ado and without further rambling, I'd like to introduce, Jim Brown to the show. Jim, thanks for coming.
I had no idea you're going to, input that photo, especially with the cigar hanging out of my mouth. But
I mean,
anyway.
it's too good just to let that die in the ether of the internet, right? I mean, it has to come up for sure.
Right.
I absolutely love that. So Jim, thanks for joining the show. Like you're going to be here for a while, and talk about your views. But before we get into those, just curious, what was your path? How did you get to where you are today? How did your path shape your thinking? I mean, I just always fascinated with the origin stories.
As far as the topic today goes, the money and banking topic, I was head of the financial institutions research group at Brandis Investment Partners for a long time, many years. And so I studied along with my team, money, banks, commercial banks, investment banks, and all other financial institutions, insurance companies, and all asset aggregators and so forth. So I got to know the space that way. And I've known a lot of what I know, what I'll talk about today for a long time. But what really got me fascinated with the topic at hand today was when I was talking to my daughter a few years ago. And she was borrowing money to buy a house. She was getting a $300,000 mortgage. And we were talking about it and various things. And I said at one point, well, what's really amazing about that, honey, I said, is that the money that you get from that bank loan is brand new money that never existed before. And my son-in-law was with her, and he looked at me like I'm crazy. And he says, no. He said, that's money that people put into the bank and that they saved and they put in their checking accounts, and then the bank lends out that money. And my daughter said, who's a smart lawyer, well-educated, said, what are you talking about? If I had not been her dad and, had some credibility, she would have written me off as a crank. And that is a true story. So I got to thinking, I said, wow, if my smart daughter and my smart son-in-law don't have any idea how this works, who else doesn't? And then I started really thinking about how important it is that people need to know. And I thought about all the other things we take for granted. Like, for example, things that work so well in life all the time. Your electricity system, the electric grid, the water system. Money is a great one. All the things that work so well and we take for granted. So, but let's imagine, every day you turn water, for example, you turn the faucet on above your sink. Every day water comes out. It's probably been like that since before you were born. Decade after decade, it works. And so you don't even ask or think about where it comes from. Is it clean? Is it pure? Is it subject to terrorist attacks? Is it subject to contamination? Do I care? And so mostly we don't care, and due to the division of labor, we really shouldn't have to care. These things just should work. But if you ever thought that your water system was going to be attacked by a terrorist, or that some, act of nature was going to interrupt it, I think you would take a real interest in your water supply, and you would take action to understand what was happening, and you would take action to, get yourself some kind of an alternate supply. You'd take action to survive. And so I think our money system is like that. We need to know about it because it's not yet contaminated completely, but it's subject to dangerous intervention.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's a real interesting analogy, water, because I mean, what we saw in Flint, Michigan is, we
Right.
actually saw contaminated water, and now all of a sudden people are questioning this, right?
Yes.
Indoor plumbing, goes back to the Romans, right? And
Right.
if not even a little before that. Um, so we just take it for granted this infrastructure's in and it works, but over time, clearly it's decayed. Clearly things went wrong within that infrastructure, and it's very fascinating. I share your view that something similar is happening in the monetary system, because look at over the past few years, right? You have the great financial crisis, probably the most acute one. So I think it's a fascinating topic. I think the water analogy is really interesting now. So I think, I'm very curious to kind of just let you dive in and kind of let us kind of, just curious, like why, so kind of know why it's important to talk about money. So what are your views on money? Where does money come from? Where did that money for your daughter's mortgage come from in your example? Just kind of
Yeah.
kick it over to you.
Okay. So I just would start the discussion by asking a question. What do you think happens? Or what were you taught happened? Or what did you learn happens if you go to a bank? Say you go to Wells Fargo, or we have a lot of people from the UK, I guess Lloyd's or HSBC. You go and you try to get a mortgage. You get a mortgage loan. You were probably taught, or you may have learned that, just like my daughter and son-in-law, that you were borrowing some other people's aggregated savings, if that's what the bank does. But that is not what commercial banks actually do. That is what other financial institutions do. For example, insurance companies aggregate money, like especially life companies, they'll aggregate money and then invest it and then pay you back at a certain time, a certain place. Or a mutual fund, even a money market mutual fund. They'll aggregate money, invest it, and then pay you back money under certain conditions. Or the firm I used to work for, Brandis Investment Partners, or a pension fund. They take in money, invest it. You don't have use of that money while they have the money invested. And so this is different from what commercial banks do. In fact, I would argue that the term lending is misapplied to commercial banks. Commercial banks don't really lend at all. See, a loan is the temporary giving up of an asset to be returned later. So if I lend you my fishing rod and you go fishing, I don't have the rod while you have it, and you agree to bring it back at a certain time, a certain place, and then I get the asset back. So I give up the asset, lend it, and then get it back. Not what happens when you go to the bank and, quote, borrow money. When you go to the bank and borrow money, what actually happens is the bank makes a book entry into your checking account and creates new money in the act of lending. It's new money that never existed before. It's the creation of a bank deposit that never existed before. And this is actually where most bank deposits and most money actually comes from. So the bank deposit that is really a promise to pay by the bank. And let me dive into it a little bit deeper. I contend that it's not only not a loan, but that the bank is actually purchasing an asset. Because here's what happens when you go and get a loan. You go to the bank and you sign a promissory note. Promissory note says, I will pay the bank money over a certain amount of time to a certain amount over time. It's a contract, it's an agreement. Now that is actually a security. That is actually a financial instrument. That is actually a financial asset. The bank then purchases that promissory note. It's a kind of like an official IOU. They purchase that promissory note. Now they have the asset called the loan, and they purchase it with made up money. They make a fictitious entry, fictitious if you want, a fictitious promise to pay in your checking account. And then that promise to pay circulates as money. You go spend it. It's accepted by everybody. It can be transferred to another bank. And these promises to pay, these checking deposits, are how we pay for almost everything. They transfer from, person to person. And this is what's actually happening. The bank is purchasing this asset called a promissory note and paying for it with newly created credit, which we call money. Now, when you think of it this way, it helps you understand other ways or other means that banks use to create money, because they don't just purchase loans, mortgage loans. They don't just purchase loans to, promissory notes from you and me and corporations around the world. They also purchase other assets. And specifically, they purchase bonds that are the obligations of governments. These are government bonds like treasuries or government agencies. And they purchase mortgage-backed securities. Usually they're guaranteed by a quasi-government agency. But if you look on the balance sheet, for example, the consolidated balance sheet of all commercial banks in the USA, and you can find it on the Federal Reserve's website, you'll see that all the assets are offset by demand deposits, and all the assets consist of assets that the bank has bought with money created by demand when demand deposits were created. And they consist of loans in the form of personal loans, consumer loans, commercial industrial loans, mortgage loans, and also bonds, mostly treasuries and government agency bonds. And then bonds made up of groups of mortgage-backed securities. This is what is on the balance sheet of US banks. This is where money comes from. And this is actually how deposits are made. If you think about it, deposits had to come from somewhere. And we have this system that is really a system of pure credit creation. There's really nothing much behind the money that we use other than this pure credit creation system. And this is what we've lived with since the US went off the gold standard many, many years ago. Yeah, so I guess I was just gonna recap it. Just remember, let me just put it this way. I think this sounds like these are really the facts of money creation. And I think it's kind of hard to accept because it seems kind of arbitrary and kind of improper. After all, you and I can't do this. We can't just, create credits that start trading. You have to be legally empowered to do this. Otherwise, you get thrown in jail. Right. This is, to most people, this is counterfeit. But this is what banks do. And do you have that John Kenneth Galbraith quote?
I was just about to lead in.
Yeah.
Just about to lead into that. So maybe you can read us this. So this is a quote that you sent me. The process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. When something so important is involved, a deeper mystery seems only decent. And can you explain what that means to you and maybe why that just resonates so deeply?
Well, I when I first saw this quote, you could have knocked me over with a feather because, I said, that's exactly how I feel. I mean, that's exactly how my daughter felt when I tried to explain to her. She was like, no, that's impossible and it's indecent. And that can't be true. And I know many people that since then that I've explained this to. I mean, really, really bright, successful people, and they don't believe it at all. So I ask you, I urge you, if you don't believe it, fine, you're free not to believe it. But it's not me saying so. I have some references that I think, are they included on the YouTube channel? If you can, there's stuff from the Bank of England, some stuff from pretty famous monetary economists. There's a book in there that's a compilation from some very good monetary economists. This is all, what I'm telling you is legit. It's just not widely known.
Yeah, all these are there's if you go to the show notes on the YouTube channel, there's a bunch of links there to Jim's recommended material. There's Jim's writings, of course, but there's also a couple primers on money and creation. There's a Bank of England paper that I really like. There's a paper from Professor Richard Werner, who I've talked about before on the show. There's a book there. Where does money come from? So all those references that Jim made can be found in the show notes.
Seth, could I mention, we've talked about a little bit about the basics of how money's created, but, as far as why should people care? So I really have found that in understanding where money comes from and therefore where it's going and who's going to get it first and how it's going to get into, quote, the economy, it's really helped me become a better investor. And it helps me understand, it also actually become a better citizen and a better voter, because what we find is that money creation, which has for many decades, even in this system of pure credit creation we have, most money creation has been, until fairly recently in the USA, it's been pretty much up to the bankers. In other words, it's been a pretty much a private decision of where to lend money and therefore where to push newly created money. Because if you think about it, that can be productive or it can be unproductive. Now, there have been some unproductive bubbles in history, many caused by money creation, lending being pushed toward a sector for too long and too much. That was really at the bottom of the housing bubble that popped in 2008. And we won't have time to get into that today. But understanding the influences on bankers to create money, whether they're entrepreneurial or whether they're government induced and government directed, can be very strong intellectual ammo for you to have when you go to invest. And I would just say, by further motivation, my belief is, you've seen this during the, to a great degree during the COVID stimulus, where so much new money was created by banking and through the QE process and so forth. You're going to see more of this. You're going to see directed credit, because it's so easy for regulators, for government regulators and bureaucrats to legislate lending and guarantee lending and make it profitable to banks to lend someplace where they would normally never lend. And in particular, I believe you're going to see it in the green lending. And you will see this probably for the next several decades. You will see lending toward green energy products that would not have occurred under an entrepreneurial market system, but money that's going to be pushed to the green energy industries because of various government programs and government influences. So this is just by way of example. This is the kind of thing I believe you can understand if you get the basics of money creation and how it works.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Like, we don't necessarily have the same views of money, and that's cool.
Right.
I know at all, but understanding money, like really diving into this subject, has really helped me understand what I'm doing as an investor, because investing is making money from money. Like, you have to understand money first in order to make more money. I mean, it is literally the first, one of the lowest sort of concepts in this conceptual, hierarchy that is investing. So it is a fascinating process. I think it's very much taken for granted. I mean, I think your story illustrates how much it has been taken for granted. And, for me, I couldn't be more excited to kind of dive into this and really try and flush it out and kind of, get into it. And the beauty of today is that the subject of money over centuries, and even the study of it has been so, it's been what's the right word, but it's been very limited in scope to academia, right? So there is a whole groupthink that has sort of persisted in the money thinking spheres. And even though throughout history there's been different groups of economic thinkers and different schools of economic thinkers, today with social media and the internet and just the proliferation of communications, it's so fascinating. It's a great time to sort of wrest the control from the authority over what is money from a definitional perspective, and really just compete with it and get it, and and lay it all out there for reality to kind of validate. So it is fascinating. I'm going to take a quick minute here and just I want to thank some people on the super chat, Jim. We had MA, who I affectionately call. Thank you for your donation. A couple donations here. Really appreciate it. Jeff Bannister, thank you so much for your super chat donation. MA says she's worried about water and electricity. They're run by bureaucrats. Yes,
yes,
should be. And again, we are seeing that bear out. I mean, again, the Flint, Michigan disaster, I think is definitely bears that out. Again, California rolling blackouts, right? I mean, these are just mind-blowing occurrences for a modern society and the amount of capital abundance that we have today. It's really crazy. So yes, you should be scared. You should be scared about roads. You should be scared about, all sorts of public endeavors, in my view. Right? Bonnie, thank you so much for your super chat donation. Jeff, again, thank you so much for the very large $50 Canadian donation. So that's about 50 cents if my exchange rate is correct. That is an awful joke. But happy birthday, Dr. Peikoff. Yes. Thank you for if any of you haven't been watching the channel and I'm rambling here, we got bumped today because of Dr. Peikoff. I couldn't be more happy to be bumped for anyone else on the planet. So that was fantastic. So we got bumped our time then, and that's why we're at 3:30 right now, or 3:30 my time, 8:30 UK. So Jim, I think it seems like we covered a lot of ground here. We're bumping up here on the half-hour mark. I hesitate to kind of jump into another topic. I know you have a lot more to say on this.
Well, could I just say, Seth, that if people want to recap and get a little more detail, actually a lot more detail into what we talked about today, you can check me out on Substack. I think the links are on the YouTube channel. I write on Substack roughly one piece a month. They're only about 1,000 words. They're as plain as I can make them. So I'd love your feedback if you read them and think they're lacking or agree or not. I'd love that to get your feedback. But I'm available. Yep.
Yeah, we've linked everything in the show notes there. Jim's also on Twitter as well. And he's going to be here for a couple of weeks. I'm very excited. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. Jim is a great guy. He's a great mind. So he will be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the super chat, and thanks, Jim, for joining the show. And we'll see you all next week. Take care.